3 weeks. That's all it's taken for Ukraine to hit Russia with so many long-range drone strikes against its oil refineries to put the country into a panic. Fuel prices are skyrocketing, oil refineries are burning, and with the Western sanctions weighing down, there's nothing that Russia can do about it. Ukraine has shattered Russia's energy backbone, crippling 13.5% of its refining capacity in only 3 weeks. And 2 recent strikes tell us that Ukraine is only just getting started. First, we take you to the Ukrainian region of Zaporizhzhia, specifically the portion of it that's currently occupied by Russia. There, trains hurtling along tracks to deliver fuel and supplies to troops are a common sight. After all, trains are the logistical backbone of the Russian military. So much so, in fact, that Irregular Warfare Initiative says that crippling Russia's train network might be the key to sabotaging the entire Russian military machine. Russian military strategy is completely dependent on its rail networks to sustain the massive logistics efforts required for the sort of large-scale combat operations, LSCO, we see today in Ukraine, the outlet noted back in October 2024. With a vast geography and relatively limited alternatives for large-scale transport, the Russian military needs efficient ways to move troops, equipment, and supplies. Ukraine clearly took note. On August 19th, a train that looked like any other was rocketing along the tracks in Zaporizhzhia. Only this wasn't any old train. It was shuttling at least 30 fuel cars to Russia's soldiers, with the refined oils lying within those cars, soon to find their way into Russia's armored cars, tanks, and any other vehicles they happen to want to use against Ukraine's defenses. Only the train never made it. The Kyiv Post reports that Ukraine launched a devastating drone strike against the metal monstrosity, igniting 9 of the fuel cars and creating a blaze so massive that it was visible from space. This wasn't a random drone strike. It was no example of Ukraine taking a chance and happening upon Russia's train. Ukraine took out this fuel in a very carefully coordinated attack that involved several pieces of equipment. The Kyiv Post reports that stopping the train in its tracks was the first course of action, as Russia's trains moved fast enough to make them difficult targets for Ukraine's drones. Attack aircraft were called in for this task. They ambushed the Russian train, spraying it with bullets and munitions until the locomotive was forced to a stop. Then came the drones. We don't know how many Ukraine sent or which types of drones it used. What we do know is that each of the 9 fuel cars that were destroyed was targeted individually, suggesting at least 9 drones, but likely more. The massive fire the attack resulted in led to a halt for all traffic on the railway line where the Russian train was caught. No more trains in, no more trains out. Ukrainian government official Petro Andriushenko confirmed the strike, releasing a statement in which he said, "The train has derailed and is now being finished off by anything that can fly. It's burning beautifully. The Ukrainian defense forces in Zaporizhzhia are once again reducing Russian logistics to zero, and it looks just epic from the ground." That's the point. Taking out 9 cars worth of fuel was already a major win for Ukraine. But forcing a train to stop before setting it on fire also clogs up Russia's logistical network. The fire needs to be put out. The train has to be cleared from the tracks. All of these jobs take time, and they leave the railway line Russia is using to supply its troops in Zaporizhzhia unusable until they're done. And if Ukraine's fire-starting strike was strong enough to damage the rails themselves, it could be days before Russia has its Zaporizhzhia trains running again. Russia's troops will be without the fuel they so desperately need, along with any other supplies and reinforcements scheduled to travel along that line. Gaps will be created. Opportunities will arise for Ukrainian counterattacks against Russia's forces on the ground, perhaps allowing for the retaking of territory inside Zaporizhzhia. This strike alone would have been terrible news for Russia's forces, but just 6 hours earlier, Ukraine dealt another major blow. The destruction of a fuel train followed a devastating strike against a major Russian oil refinery. We take you to Volgograd. Kyiv Post says is home to a refinery that has an annual capacity of 14.8 million tons of crude oil. That oil flows into the facility, being transformed from what is basically an unusable raw oil product into the refined products such as diesel and gasoline that Russia sends to its army and uses to keep fuel flowing to its people, and when it's able, sells to generate more money for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. All told, the outlet says the refinery is responsible for about 5.6% of all of Russia's refined oil products. And just like the train in Zaporizhzhia, that refinery is now on fire. The Moscow Times reported on the strike, noting that the Volgograd regional governor, Andrei Bukharov, claims that the fire at the refinery started due to drone debris that fell after Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles were taken out by Russia's air defenses. The Russian Defense Ministry attempted to confirm this with a telegram post stating, "Over the course of the past night, air defense systems on duty intercepted and destroyed 23 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles of the aircraft type. 13 of those drones were shot down over Volgograd." with another 5 being destroyed over Crimea, and 5 more over Russia's Rostov region. But that's what Russia always says. If we believe the country's defense ministry, Ukraine has never carried out a successful drone strike against any Russian facility inside Russia itself. The country's air defenses always shoot them down, and it's only ever drone debris that causes fires and destruction. Pull the other one, Putin. Russia's claims always have to be taken with an entire ocean's worth of salt because they parrot out the same statements every time. It always shoots down Ukraine's drones. It's always debris that causes the damage. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because the Volgograd oil refinery is still burning. The Kyiv Independent offers more to the story, stating that the Russian pro-Kremlin media outlet SHOT reported that Volgograd residents claim they heard anywhere between 4 and 10 explosions during the course of the night. Several also reported seeing Ukrainian drones flying low in the direction of the city's refinery, along with bright flashes that were visible in the night sky. Those flashes may have been Ukrainian drones being shot down, as Russia claims, or they could have been those same drones scoring direct hits against the Volgograd facility. Ukraine hasn't commented on the strike, though Russia claims that there were no casualties and that the fire at the refinery was put out within a handful of hours, the Kyiv Independent says. But what we have here are 2 strikes conducted against Russia's refined oil that have caused serious problems. Are these strikes isolated? Examples of Ukraine carrying out rare attacks against Russian oil that it can't repeat? Absolutely not. What we saw in Volgograd and Zaporizhzhia on August 19th was just the latest in a series of strikes against Russia's refined oil in what have been several weeks of terror for Putin's forces. In its report on the latest strikes, the Kyiv Post says that all of this is part of a wider Ukrainian strategy. Ukrainian strike planners in early August opened a probable campaign to damage Russian fuel production capacity, launching a flurry of attacks against refineries, sometimes hundreds of kilometers inside the Russian Federation, the outlet says. It also notes that the first of these strikes happened on August 2nd, and since then Ukraine has hit refineries in Ryazan, Krasnodar, Saratov, and Samara, along with the Volgograd region. Drone assaults on fuel trains are a new addition to that strategy, it seems, but they have the same impact of depriving Russia's soldiers of the fuel they need to sustain the endless assaults against Ukraine's defenses that Putin orders. Euromaidan Press comes in with the numbers. The August 2nd strike that started it all hit the Novokubishevsk refinery, which has a capacity of 8.3 million tons of crude oil per year. The Saratov refinery that Ukraine hit can process 5.8 million tons annually. On August 15th, Ukraine hit the Samara refinery, taking out another 8.5 million tons of capacity. It also hit Volgograd on that date too, striking the same facility that it left in flames again 4 days later, costing Russia another 14.8 million tons in capacity in the process. Over and over again, Ukraine hits these refineries. With some strikes, it takes out oil storage tanks, decimating both crude and refined products, to ensure that oil can never be used again. Other drone assaults take out the production facilities and other vital mechanisms within the plants themselves. In all cases, the refineries have to be shut down, both for safety reasons and so that Russia can carry out repairs. Those repairs are a major issue for Russia. We'll explain why in a moment. But finally, we come back to the headline figure that we shared at the beginning of this video. Euromaidan Press says that constant Ukrainian strikes against Russia's refinery have caused Russia to lose up to 44.3 million tons of annual refinery capacity. That's a staggering 13.5% of the country's total. But what does this all mean, really? You might find yourself wondering. And it's a good question to ask. Ukraine's strikes, though certainly impactful, aren't massive enough to destroy entire refineries. These facilities are often spread out over several square miles of territory, so a few drones hitting their marks and causing fires isn't going to take them offline forever. Any damage caused is temporary, and the refineries do eventually come back online. Eventually is the key term there, and that's what Ukraine is banking on. Russia's problem right now isn't just that so many of its refineries are going up in flames, it's that Western sanctions have created a situation in which repairing those refineries can take weeks or even months, longer than it would have in the past. Euromaidan Press notes this in its report on Russia losing 13.5% of its refining capacity. It says that repairs at the Ryazan and Novokubishevsk plants that Ukraine struck earlier in August are expected to take around a month to complete. That means neither is fully operational at the time of the creating of this video. The same goes for the Samara plant, which Russia expects to be offline until at least the end of August, perhaps even longer. We can probably safely assume that repairs at the Volgograd plant are going to take just as long, though that refinery may be prioritized due to its higher annual capacity. Why all of this time? It's all about sanctions, and this isn't a new problem for Russia. Back in November 2024, Energy Intelligence reported that repair work at Russia's oil refineries was being frustrated by Western sanctions. Ukraine had started its campaign of deep strikes against these facilities by this point, though they were nowhere near as intense as we've seen in August of this year. The Caspian Policy Center says that Ukraine launched 61 drone strikes against Russian refineries between January 2024 and March 2025, with at least 40 of those strikes resulting in fires. Still, these strikes were more widespread than the more dedicated campaign Ukraine has created for August. Regardless, by November 2024, Russia was already starting to feel the sanctions pinch. Energy Intelligence says that sanctions have blocked access to key equipment and technology that Russia needs to make repairs on the downstream side of its energy industry, which covers oil refining as well as its upstream and liquid natural gas or LNG sectors. Operators have sought workarounds with some success on the upstream and LNG side, the outlet says, but analysts expect the challenges for the downstream side to intensify as Moscow puzzles over how to manage refining capacity going forward. This was a puzzle that Russia still hadn't solved by July of this year, the Moscow Times reports, and the situation has gotten so bad that Russia's energy minister, Sergei Savilyov, felt compelled to say something about. Why do they sometimes fail? Because now in the sanctions regime we are in, let's say 4 months are planned for repairs, but something is delayed, something is not delivered to us, the minister said. His comments came at a time when Russian refineries have seen their crude output drop to a 12-year low, with Savilyov also noting that deadlines for repairs, both planned and unplanned, are having to be shifted constantly. And that's another interesting point. It's easy to focus on the repairs that Ukraine is forcing Russia to make to its refineries. The blazing fires that light up the skies of Russia make it pretty obvious that work needs to be done at those facilities. However, there are also scheduled repairs that need to take place. Refineries can't run indefinitely after they're built. A lot of moving parts are needed to keep them going, and those parts degrade and need maintenance. Add technical challenges that have nothing to do with Ukraine, and Russia would already be struggling under the weight of sanctions, even without drones attacking its refineries. Discovery Alert offers some numbers, stating that a single technical malfunction can take days or weeks to repair. Minor equipment failures may need up to 3 weeks of work, with major system damage bumping that time required up to between 1 and 3 months. These would be the timeframes without sanctions affecting access to parts and equipment, so you can probably add even more time now. The same outlet says that things are so bad that at least one of Russia's refineries has been forced to halt all of its crude intake. These are the sorts of problems Ukraine exacerbates with the strikes that it's been launching throughout August. Every damaged refinery creates another headache for Russian technicians who are already nearly crippled by sanctions-related migraines. And now Ukraine is taking out fuel trains as well. Air horns are being let off to make those headaches even worse. Imagine you're part of a Russian technical team that finally gets a refinery back online after weeks of work. That refinery starts sending out fuel, which gets loaded into a train and sent toward the front line. A few days later, you hear the news that the train has just been struck by drones, and a huge amount of that fuel is now on fire. And then Ukraine hits the refinery you just repaired again. Russia's refining companies just can't win. Repairs are made moot with every new strike, and even the refined oil that is being sent toward the front line is going up in flames. Frustration. That isn't the half of it for Russia's oil refining companies. But if they're getting increasingly flustered by Ukraine's drone strikes taking out 13.5% of their capacity and counting, that's nothing compared to what the average Russian consumer is feeling as a result of all of this. There's a price blitz going on in Russia, and it all centers around refined oil products. Both Euromaidan Press and the Moscow Times have reports showcasing how much more expensive fuel has become for the everyday Russian and the companies that buy refined oil products from Russia's refineries. The Moscow Times says that the benchmark price of AI-92 gasoline has risen to $890 per ton on the St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange. AI-95 has risen to $1,000 per ton. These two fuels have risen in per ton price by 38% and 49% respectively since the beginning of 2025. Euromaidan Press repeats those figures, while also adding that Ukraine's strikes are undermining Russia's ability to fund the Ukraine war. A strike against the Druzhba pipeline earlier in August, for example, shut down one of Russia's most important oil arteries that it uses to export its products to other countries. Even without that pipeline being shut down, less refining capacity means less fuel being produced. Russia has to prioritize its military and the country's people ahead of exporting at times like this, and we've seen the pressure pay off. Reuters announced on August 1st that Russia implemented a gasoline export ban that was going to last until at least August 31st and may run even longer. Less products for exports means less sales. Less sales means less money for Putin's war machine. Coming back to Russia's everyday citizens, Ukraine's strikes combined with the slowdown in maintenance caused by the West's sanctions are creating pressure at the pumps. That pressure isn't exactly alleviated by gas stations having to pay more for the products they sell. You don't think those companies are going to eat the higher costs, right? They're going to pass them on to consumers, of course. The Center for Strategic and International Studies highlights why this is a problem, stating on August 5th that Russia is highly sensitive to gasoline prices. Preventing sharp spikes is important for Putin's popularity and preventing domestic discontent. Sharp spikes aren't being prevented right now. Who knows, perhaps the pressure Ukraine is creating at the pumps by taking out 13.5% of Russia's refining capacity will translate into internal pressure on Putin. That sort of pressure will only serve Ukraine well as its soldiers continue to defend against the Russian invasion. Speaking of the invasion, spare a thought for Russia's soldiers in all of this. The Zaporizhzhia train that Ukraine just destroyed on August 19th was supposed to be transporting fuel that Russia's soldiers needed for their vehicles. Refineries being taken offline means even less of that fuel is being produced. Putin isn't going to order his soldiers to stop attacking Ukraine's defenses just because they're no longer able to bring their mechanized units along to the fight. They'll still get their orders, they'll still carry out their assaults, and they'll still end up dying in their hundreds and thousands, all thanks to them not having the fuel they need. Ukraine will be crying a river for those soldiers, we're sure. The Ukrainian campaign against Russia's oil refining isn't going to stop anytime soon. Ukraine hasn't rested on its laurels at any point during August, and there is still well over a week of the month to go. Could we see Russia's refining capacity cut by 15% by the end of the month, maybe even 20%? We'll have to wait and see, though we wouldn't put it past Ukraine, given how effective these most recent strikes have been. By the way, we mentioned the Druzhba oil pipeline that Ukraine hit earlier in the video. That's not the only pipeline that has fallen into Ukraine's crosshairs. On August 12th, Ukraine did in hours what took Western sanctions years to achieve, with a strike against the Central Asia Center gas pipeline. Find out more in our video. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest attacks on Russian oil. And thank you for watching.